It occurred to me recently that there comes a point where you reach a fork in the road. And that fork is when you have to choose between the dumb man's way of making a fortune and the smart man's way of making a fortune. And this is the crude way to describe these two options. However, if you view making a lot of money as non optional, non negotiable, I believe this is the impasse you tend to reach if you're a naturally very conscientious individual. So, to describe what I mean by the dumb and smart man's way of making a fortune, essentially, the smart person's way of making a fortune is, upskilling, getting really highly educated and having really, really valuable skills that are rare, such that you are compensated very highly for your time. And therefore, you don't have to invest as much time in the long run to receive a large amount of compensation, a large amount of money. And the dumb man's way of making a fortune is simply working a lot, working really hard and working a lot at something that is maybe moderately difficult, moderately highly skilled, moderately skilled, I don't know, however you'd want to phrase that. Something that's like just middle of the road, but you can get a lot of hours. You can trade a lot of your time for a lot of money because you're just trading a lot of time. Like per hour, you're not being compensated very much. You're not being compensated an absolute pittance for your time, but you're not making the big bucks, so to speak. But you're just willing to compensate for that by grinding your ass off. And perhaps the trade-off is that you can live a simpler life, or you have to live a simpler life, but you have simpler pleasures, simpler joys, and you're not necessarily less happy, but you take your joys and your pleasures in life from different things. Whereas the smart man has a lot more time, but maybe had to front load a lot more effort, maybe takes more pleasures in more, I don't want to say sophisticated things or sophisticated pursuits, but more highly intellectually demanding pursuits, perhaps. Now, I think there are merit to both of these methods of pursuing fortune. And I think a lot of people would listen to this and they would say, well, obviously, the smart man's path to fortune is just the best option. It's the best way to go about it because it means you'll have more time sooner and you'll have to trade less of your time to achieve a fortune. To that, I would say there is real merit to that. But one, you don't know if you're going to be successful in that route. You don't know if that path is going to be for you. Because you do have to have some inherent natural capability. You have to have some genetic predisposition towards intelligence, at least to some extent. You have to perhaps have the right upbringing to be also predisposed for that path, for the intellectual career path. You also have to take pleasure in intellectual pursuits a little bit more than other people. Whereas if you're, let's say, of average intelligence and of average upbringing, perhaps you're not as well suited to an intellectual career path and thus less suited to an intellectual path to fortune and riches and prosperity. So on that basis, I think it's at least likely that some people are more or less suited to one path or the other, just at a baseline from their environment and their genetic makeup. For some people, the smart man's approach to fortune may not be doable. But there are also some reasons why the dumb person's approach to fortune and prosperity might be simply preferable even to an intellectually gifted or at least capable man. The dumb person's path to fortune and riches looks like grinding your ass off, as I mentioned, and just throwing money into an index fund. It doesn't rely on prediction. It doesn't rely on timing. and it doesn't rely on granting yourself access to information that most people don't have. You just dollar cost average into an index fund. You work your ass off. You work a lot of hours to have the spare money to throw at the index fund machine. This means that intellectually, you might not be working as hard, but physically, you're probably working harder, at least over the long term. The simplicity of it allows you to be thinking about other things. It allows you might be, working long hours in something like a factory job. Maybe you're a laborer, not a skilled laborer, just a laborer. Maybe you work basic reception, or maybe you work a combination of these sorts of jobs all together. Maybe you do some door dashing on the side, or pizza delivery, or perhaps you work in a dish pit on the side. And you're just working crazy hours to have the margin to be able to throw an impressive amount of money into the market nevertheless. Now, as I said, if you're smart enough to make a killing investing less time into a pursuit that yields a large amount of money, that has a long list of benefits. You're not perhaps sacrificing your body, and you're perhaps not sacrificing your soul to this end of eventually having a huge amount of money and a lot of wealth and prosperity. But there is still a joy and a certain meaning to be found in whatever pursuit you choose. And it's really easy to be black-pilled, and it's really easy to feel like this is impossible. But there are two resources that I cling to in my life whenever I feel like my path isn't perhaps as high leverage as it could be. And this is the myth of Sisyphus and a man's search for meaning. So Sisyphus is all about a man who finds meaning and purpose in simply pushing a boulder up a hill. There is no reason or purpose to pushing that boulder up the hill. There is no end goal. If he stops pushing, the boulder is going to roll back down and he's going to have to start from scratch, but there is no real end destination. He's just pushing this boulder. Sisyphus can choose to make that pursuit meaningful. He can still find ways of making that pursuit meaningful. He can see just how far he can push that boulder. How long can he last? How hard can he push it? How heavy can he make that boulder? How long can he go before he needs to rest? And a man's search for meaning is all about how one man managed to find meaning even in the most direst of circumstance, existing in a Holocaust camp, a Nazi death camp. And that is a true story, by the way. So one is a myth and one is true, but in a certain sense they are both really true. The human mind is a fantastic thing, and it can adapt to a lot, especially when you're young. There is a third story that I want to raise with you that dovetails with the initial two, and that's the story of David Goggins. He's documented his life and how he finds beauty in the suffering and how he finds purpose and meaning and power in it. And he lives that every single day. This is not a myth. This is not a true story of the past. This is a current man who is doing this. Every single day, he is brutalizing himself, brutalizing his body, and he finds power and courage in that. When you're working a very physically demanding job, something that isn't very intellectual in nature, if you're working long hours and you're on that path, you're taking that dumb man's path to fortune, you're learning things about yourself that the smart man might not. You're investing everything into this pursuit. You're giving it everything. There is no room for guessing. You know that you can't really. You're learning about yourself, and you're improving your capacity for work. If you follow this path, you can form yourself into an unbreakable man. You can get yourself to a point where you have a very bulletproof mindset And you can cultivate a form of mental and physical toughness and relentlessness that someone who does not lack for intellectual capacities might not ever develop because they never have to. The world needs men like that. The world needs toughness. The world needs people who are capable of extraordinary feats of mental and physical endurance. For role models and for fighters and for moving the economy along. And when I say role model, in this sense, like, you might, even if subconsciously, roll your eyes a little bit, but when I say role model, I mean it. Like, most of the men in the world aren't particularly smart, and they have one path to wealth and prosperity, and that's with their hands and their backs and mental grit and fortitude and toughness and relentlessness. For most men, that's the reality. That is their path. And they can either take it or choose not to. Without people that model that, a lot of men will be lost, and they won't know what it looks like. They won't know what it takes. They won't understand the sacrifice. And taking this path, I think it's especially incredible if you can manage it when you haven't had that role model. And a lot of us men today don't have that role model. A lot of us grew up without a dad to model that for us. And that makes it all the more important. You know, a lot of our hero stories, they'll focus on a protagonist who has some inherent gift that is handed to them or obtained by accident, or they're just born with it. Think Spider-Man, he's bitten by a spider. He didn't choose that, it just came to him. And all of a sudden he has this immense gift. And I'm not saying that's without sacrifice, but I would argue that the man who doesn't get gifted any sort of extraordinary power and has to slave away most of his life to earn his freedom and his power and his everything, I think that's honestly more important. I think that's more impressive. I think that's more virtuous. Take Batman, Bruce Wayne. He starts with money. And yeah, he has like a lot of that bravado stripped away from him through sheer trauma. And in that sense, he does earn, he does kind of earn it, right? Like he is just an average man, essentially. He just has money. But even that was given to him. I think the real superheroes are the ones that weren't particularly smart. They just had sheer will and fortitude that they developed and cultivated from nothing, and from which they gained freedom and wealth and power. I think that's more impressive, especially if they keep their morality intact the whole way, because that's even harder. I'm trying to think of another example. Superman, obviously, he's just a god among men. Enough said, I don't really have to expand on that. It's pretty self-explanatory why that's not as impressive to someone like me. I think that's why Rocky is such a powerful story, because he does kind of have a rags to riches come up story, and he's not particularly smart. He's just gritty, and he's full of determination. But do you see what I'm coming from? Do you see what I'm trying to get at? Like, the person who's born with all these gifts, they are never going to have. They're almost certainly never going to have what someone who's born from nothing and has to make something of themselves will have. What they will gain, what they will develop in themselves. They will develop a character that you can't just be handed. You will have a worldliness and a connection with the average person, and a strength and a fortitude that someone with gifts, with unfair advantages, they're just not going to have. So in a certain sense, like, you have something that the intellectuals and the gifted and the privileged will never have. But in any case, all of this is to say that there are very good reasons for taking both paths. But I think the dumb man's path, as crude as it is to put it that way, I think if you do it right, it is the most virtuous path. I think it is the most impressive path. And I think it's the most beneficial to society. So all of that is to say that if you don't have a big leg up in this world, if you don't have role models, if you don't have a silver spoon, if you don't have the smarts, there is really something to be said for that. The world still needs you. And the grind might not look as glamorous as what a lot of pop culture these days and what a lot of our hero stories will show us. It might not be that glamorous. It might not be that pretty, but damn it, you can still take pride in your grind as someone on this path, taking this road, the hard road. So I just wanted to get on here and discuss this because it was something I was thinking about. But if you have thoughts or ideas on this that you'd like to share, I'm all ears. I would love to hear it. I am always up for a discussion. And I don't know when you're seeing this, but for me right now it's Friday. I have tomorrow off, so I'm gonna try and rest and recover on that day so that I can get back and get after it for Sunday through Friday next week. Yeah, I hope you're doing well. I hope life has been kind to you, and I hope that whatever hardship you're enduring, I hope you can improve and overcome and make whatever sacrifices your life demands of you to reach success, prosperity, and growth. But that's all I've got for now. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.